The air in Aurelia tasted of money. It was a rich, complex flavor, mingling the earthy perfume of black truffle oil, the crisp effervescence of vintage champagne, and the faint, metallic scent of unspoken power. Chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen rain, their light fracturing across a sea of tailored suits and silk dresses. In this gilded hall, conversations were currency, and laughter was a performance. Moving through it all was Alara Vance, a shadow in a plain black uniform. To the patrons of Aurelia, she was less a person and more a function, an extension of the table, a pair of hands to refill a glass or clear a plate. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense ponytail, and her face, devoid of makeup, possessed a quiet, classical beauty that didn't scream for attention and therefore received none. Her black flats were scuffed at the toes, a tiny, unforgivable sin in a world where perfection was the minimum standard. She navigated the floor with an economy of movement that was almost unnatural. Her spine was straight, her steps deliberate, her balance absolute. When she carried a tray laden with delicate, long-stemmed glasses, it seemed to float, an island of perfect stillness in the buzzing room. But no one noticed the discipline. They only saw the help. The epicenter of the evening's arrogance was the VIP table in the corner. Sterling Croft, a hedge fund king with slicked-back silver hair and a gold Rolex that flashed with every grand gesture, was holding court. His voice, a smooth baritone accustomed to being obeyed, cut through the restaurant's hum. "Don't spill the Bordeaux, girl," he sneered as Alara approached, his eyes barely glancing at her. "You couldn't afford the cleaning bill, let alone the bottle." His wife, Beatrice, let out a sharp, tinkling laugh. She was a woman sculpted by ambition and diet, her red dress clinging to a frame that was all sharp angles. Her smile was as glossy and hard as the diamonds at her throat. Across from them sat Kyler Thorne, a crypto bro in his early 30s whose tan was too perfect for the city, and his girlfriend, Sloane Michelson, a blonde whose entire being seemed to be an advertisement for new money. They all laughed, a chorus of casual cruelty. Alara's expression didn't flicker. She placed the bottle on the table with a soft, respectful clink, her fingers brushing the cool, dark glass. Inside she felt nothing, not anger, not humiliation. It was just noise. She had learned long ago to filter out the signals that didn't matter. These people, with their designer bags and cutting remarks, were static. The real world operated on a different frequency. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice low and even. Sterling waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to his story about market volatility. Alara retreated, melting back into the background. Her eyes, however, missed nothing. She registered the exits, the placement of the security cameras, the way the staff moved. She noted the tension in the kitchen and the feigned calm of the manager, Murray, who was sweating under his cheap suit. It was a constant, low-level threat assessment, a habit forged in a life she had tried to leave behind. From a secluded table in the far corner, another pair of eyes watched the exchange. Declan Hayes was a man who commanded attention by actively avoiding it. At 35, he was one of the most powerful tech billionaires in the country, yet his suit was a quiet, understated charcoal, and he wore no jewelry save for a simple, elegant watch. While the rest of Aurelia performed, he observed. He had noticed the waitress, Alara. He'd noticed the preternatural stillness in her movements, the way she carried herself with a ramrod posture that spoke of something other than servitude. He saw the flicker of contempt from Sterling's table and the utter lack of reaction from the woman. It wasn't deference, it was containment. It was the calm of a deep ocean, unbothered by the froth on the surface. He felt a prickle of curiosity, a rare sensation for a man who believed he had seen every variation of human behavior. He put down his phone and watched her, truly watched her, for the first time. The evening wore on, a symphony of clinking forks and self-congratulation. Alara moved through her duties with relentless efficiency. She cleared tables, refilled water glasses, and endured the casual condescension that was part of the job. But the air felt heavy, charged with a strange, static tension, as if the world were holding its breath. She had to return to Sterling Croft's table. He held up his wine glass to the light, inspecting it like a jeweler examining a flawed gem. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to an imaginary smudge. "I suppose they don't teach proper cleaning in whatever backwater you crawled out of." Beatrice giggled again, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. Alara paused, her fingers steady on the silver water pitcher. My apologies, sir. I'll bring you a new glass immediately. Her voice was a perfect monotone, betraying nothing. As she turned away, Sloane leaned toward Kyler, her voice a stage whisper designed to carry. She has absolutely no class. I bet she's never even been to a place like this, except to scrub the floors. Alara's stride didn't falter. Her shoulders didn't tense. But for a single, fleeting moment, her knuckles whitened as her hand tightened on the pitcher's handle. It was a flicker of strain so minute that only someone watching with intense focus would have noticed. From his corner table, Declan Hayes noticed. The manager, Murray, intercepted her by the kitchen doors, his hand clamping onto her elbow. His face was slick with a permanent sheen of sweat. "What did I tell you about bothering the guests?" he hissed, his voice low but harsh. "And stay clear of Mr. Hayes's table. He doesn't need you tripping over him." He jerked his head toward the corner where Declan sat alone. "Understood," Alara said, her voice flat. She didn't argue, didn't explain. She just kept moving, a study in quiet endurance. Later, during a brief lull, she paused at the service bar to refill her pitchers. Her hand slipped into her apron pocket, her fingers finding the worn, creased edges of a small photograph. She pulled it out, shielding it from view. It was an old, faded image of a younger Alara, barely 20, dressed in desert camouflage. Her face was grimy with dust and exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp, alive. She was standing next to a group of soldiers, their arms slung around each other in a dusty courtyard under a relentless, foreign sun. They were smiling. It was a lifetime ago. Family? The bartender, a kind-eyed older man named Mike, had noticed her distant stare. Alara quickly slipped the photo back into her pocket, her face an unreadable mask. "Something like that," she said, turning away. The memory was a jolt, a flash of a world where stakes were life and death, not bruised egos and expensive wine. That world had taught her to pick her battles. The skirmishes at Aurelia weren't worth her energy. They were ghosts, echoes of conflict that couldn't touch her. But the assaults kept coming. A young hostess, whose name Alara had never bothered to learn, cornered her by the bar. "You know, Alara, you should really smile more." The hostess chirped, her tone dripping with faux concern. "You're bringing down the vibe. Nobody wants a gloomy waitress serving their $500 dinner." Alara set her pitcher down, the movement slow and deliberate. "I'm here to work, not perform." The hostess smirked. "Yeah, well, maybe if you tried a little harder, you wouldn't look like you just rolled out of a shelter." A nearby couple snickered. Alara's hand paused on the pitcher, her fingers tightening, just for a moment, before she turned and walked away. Each barb was a tiny paper cut, insignificant on its own, but together they were beginning to draw blood, testing the limits of the ironclad control she had spent years building. And through it all, she could feel a pair of eyes on her Declan Hayes's, not judging, not pitying, but simply watching, waiting, as if he knew the static was about to break. The breaking point came not as a whisper, but as a roar. The grand front doors of Aurelia slammed open, cracking against the walls like a thunderclap. 3 men in black ski masks burst in, their heavy boots thudding on the polished marble floor. They held guns, sleek and menacingly real, raised high. "Everybody down, now!" the leader shouted, his voice a rough, gravelly bark. The gilded hall exploded into chaos. The symphony of polite society shattered into a cacophony of pure terror. Crystal glasses shattered as patrons scrambled and dove under tables, their expensive clothes dragging through spilled wine and overturned food. Sterling Croft, a titan of industry moments before, was now a trembling heap on the floor, yanking Beatrice down with him so hard her diamond necklace snagged on the tablecloth and snapped, scattering stones like worthless pebbles. Sloane's sobs were loud and hysterical, mascara streaking down her face. Kyler was on his knees, hands raised, muttering, "Take whatever you want, just don't shoot." In the center of the room, Alara stood alone. She was holding a tray of empty glasses. She didn't drop it. She didn't scream. Her eyes scanned the robbers 1, 2, 3. She noted their weapons, their stances, their positioning relative to the exits. It wasn't a choice. It was an instinct. The leader, a stocky man with a jagged scar visible above the edge of his mask, zeroed in on her. The anomaly, the one who wasn't screaming. He stormed over, his gun aimed directly at her chest. "What's wrong with you? Get on the floor," he barked, his voice echoing in the suddenly quieter room. From under a nearby table, a woman in a velvet blazer hissed, her voice venomous with fear. "She's going to get us all killed. Why can't she just do what they say?" Sterling Croft, half hidden, looked up, his face twisted with a mixture of terror and his familiar sneer. "Don't be an idiot," he hissed at Alara. "He'll shoot you." The leader was now inches from her, the barrel of his gun pressing against her forehead. "You deaf? Kneel." Alara's breathing was slow and even. She looked past the gun and into the man's eyes. She saw panic there, beneath the aggression. He was sloppy, untrained. She exhaled, a slow, deliberate breath. She decisively placed the tray on a nearby table. The sound of glass on wood was small but sharp in the tense silence. Then she moved. It was a single, fluid motion. She shifted her weight, a subtle pivot that took her head just out of the gun's direct line of fire. Before the man could process the movement, her left hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. She twisted hard. There was a sickening crack of bone, and the gun clattered to the floor. Simultaneously, her right elbow came up in a brutal, efficient arc, connecting squarely with his jaw. He dropped like a sack of potatoes, unconscious. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "What just happened?" someone whispered. The other two robbers froze, their confidence shattered. They stared at their fallen leader, then at the silent waitress who stood over him, her posture relaxed but ready. The second robber, a lanky man with twitchy eyes, snapped out of his shock first. Fueled by rage and fear, he charged at her, screaming, "You think you're a hero, bitch?" He swung his gun wildly, like a club. Beatrice shrieked from behind her chair. "She's making it worse. She's going to get us all killed." Alara didn't look at them. She didn't hear them. The static was gone. There was only the signal. She ducked under the robber's clumsy swing, spun on the ball of her foot, and used his momentum to send him staggering off balance. He crashed backward into a service cart, the sound of shattering dishware loud enough to make half the room flinch. The third robber was more cautious. He saw he was outmatched. He dropped his gun and pulled a long, wicked-looking knife from his belt, its blade catching the chandelier light. "You're dead," he growled, lunging low and fast, aiming for her side. Alara sidestepped, moving with the grace of a dancer. She caught his knife hand by the wrist, using his own momentum against him. She twisted, a complex and painful joint lock that forced his fingers to open. The knife flipped through the air. She caught it by the handle, its weight familiar in her palm, and used her leverage to slam him face first onto the marble floor. A dull thud, and it was over. It had taken less than a minute. 3 men down, groaning or unconscious. Alara stood over them, the knife held loosely in her grip, her breathing barely heavier than before. The room was utterly, completely silent, stunned into submission. In that moment, she was not a waitress. She was not a shadow. She was the most dangerous person in the room, and everyone knew it. From his corner table, Declan Hayes slowly rose to his feet. He hadn't moved during the entire ordeal. He had simply watched, his face a mask of cold, profound astonishment. He wasn't looking at the downed robbers. His eyes were locked on Alara, and in them was a look of dawning, absolute awe. The silence was heavy, thick with fear and disbelief. Then, the whispers started again, but their tone had changed. It was no longer contempt, but a terrified suspicion. "She's dangerous." An older man with a silver beard pointed a trembling finger at Alara. "You saw how she moved. That's not normal." His wife, clutching a diamond bracelet, nodded frantically. "She has to be some kind of plant. Maybe she was working with them." The absurd accusation hung in the air, a testament to their inability to comprehend a reality outside their narrow worldview. Alara heard it. She calmly placed the knife on the table, her movements slow and deliberate, a clear signal that the threat was over. Her eyes flicked toward the man for just a second, a gaze so steady and penetrating that he shrank back, his bravado crumbling. Minutes later, the wail of sirens grew louder, and the doors burst open again. This time, it was the police, their uniforms and heavy boots a reassuring presence. As they cuffed the groaning robbers, the guests began to stand, their voices rising in a nervous, chattering crescendo. Murray, the manager, his face pale and blotchy, wiped sweat from his brow and stormed toward Alara. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice loud and accusing, as if she had betrayed him by not being helpless. "What have you been hiding from us?" Beatrice Croft, fixing her disheveled hair, added with a sneer, "She's trouble. I knew it the second I saw her." "Hi, you." Alara didn't respond. She simply began to pick up a few fallen glasses, her hands steady, her face a blank canvas. She was retreating back into her shell, the storm having passed. Then, one of the officers, a grizzled sergeant with a buzz cut, stopped dead in his tracks. He lowered his radio, his eyes wide as he stared at her. He didn't see a waitress. He saw the posture, the controlled breathing, the efficient way she had dispatched 3 armed men. "My God," he breathed, his voice cutting through the noise. Every head turned. The room went still. He addressed her directly, with a professional respect that stunned the onlookers. "Ma'am, where did you serve?" Alara looked at him, a flicker of acknowledgement in her eyes. "It was a long time ago, Sergeant." The officer shook his head, a faint, incredulous smile breaking through his professional demeanor. He turned to the stunned crowd. "This posture, this efficiency, I've seen it in the best. Special forces." He pointed a thumb at Alara. "This is not a waitress. This is a soldier." A wave of absolute shock washed over the room. The air crackled with the sound of shattered preconceptions. Sterling Croft's mouth hung open, his face a mask of horrified understanding. Beatrice's eyes were wide, her sneer gone, replaced by pure astonishment. Kyler Thorne stared at the floor, his face burning with shame. The truth, stark and undeniable, had been laid bare. The woman they had mocked, the nobody they had dismissed, was a highly trained veteran, a protector, a hero. Their wealth and status suddenly felt like cheap costumes in the presence of her quiet, proven substance. But Murray, the manager, was a man incapable of seeing past a uniform. Blinded by fury and fear of lawsuits, he pushed through the crowd. "I don't care who she is," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "She endangered my guests. She's fired! Fired! Get your things and get out." A few guests smirked, Sterling among them. It was a chance to reclaim a sliver of their superiority, to see her brought low again. Even in the face of her heroism, their first instinct was to reassert the hierarchy. Alara looked at Murray, her gaze level. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply set down the glasses she was holding, turned, and walked toward the staff locker room, her steps even, her back straight. Her silence was louder than any shout, a final damning indictment of their small, petty world. Alara had almost reached the kitchen doors when a voice, low but carrying to every corner of the silent room, stopped her. "Wet." It was Declan Hayes. He had been standing by his table, a silent observer through the entire aftermath. Now, he pushed away from it and began to walk toward her. Every eye in Aurelia followed him. The room held its breath. He moved with an unhurried grace that radiated power, a stark contrast to the frantic energy that had filled the space moments before. He stopped directly in front of Alara, his presence filling the space between them. He was taller than she'd realized, his dark eyes missing nothing. He looked not at the police, not at the stunned guests, but only at her. "I don't see a waitress," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I see the only person in this entire room who kept her nerve, the only one who acted." He looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the rich and powerful, lingering for a moment on Sterling Croft's pale face before returning to Alara. Then he extended his hand. "My name is Declan Hayes." Alara looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. His eyes held no pity, only a profound and genuine respect. For the first time all night, she felt seen. Not as a function, not as a threat, but as herself. She took his hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused, a silent testament to a life of discipline. His was warm and strong. The contact was brief, but it felt like an anchor. "I'm looking for someone with your skills and composure," Declan said, his voice rising slightly so everyone could hear. "I'd like to offer you a position, personal security advisor, effective immediately. Your first task will be to conduct a full-scale review of my protection detail." He produced a business card. "We'll discuss the formal role and the terms tomorrow at my office." A murmur of disbelief ran through the room. Sterling Croft's jaw actually dropped. Beatrice's wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. It was a transfer of power so swift and total that it left them reeling. Just then, a young busboy, a teenager who had been hiding behind the bar, stepped forward. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were wide with admiration. "I saw what you did," he said to Alara, his voice cracking but loud enough for the room to hear. "You saved us, all of us." The guests shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others glaring at the boy as if he had betrayed their unspoken code of silence. For the first time all night, Ilara's expression softened. She looked at the boy, a genuine warmth entering her eyes. She gave a single nod. "Just doing my job. The busboy swallowed hard and stepped back, his courage spent but his point made. Ilara turned back to Declan, her eyes questioning. He simply held her gaze, a silent promise in his expression. She had walked into Aurelia that evening as a shadow, invisible and dismissed. Now, she would walk out as the chosen protector of one of the most powerful men in the world. She slowly withdrew her hand from his, the lingering warmth, a strange and unfamiliar sensation. She gave Murray one last, unreadable look, then followed Declan Hayes toward the door, leaving the ruins of Aurelia and its petty tyrants behind her. The story didn't just break, it detonated. By the next morning, the security footage from Aurelia was the #1 trending topic worldwide. Ilara's calm, precise takedown was replayed in slow motion on every news network, a stark contrast to the chaotic, terrified dives of the city's elite. Headlines screamed, "Waitress hero, from Air Special Forces soldier, saves billionaires from armed robbers." The internet, in its ruthless, swift judgment, became her avenger. A viral post captioned, "This man mocked the woman who was about to save his life," featured a clip of Sterling Croft's Bordeaux sneer, followed immediately by footage of him crawling under his table. His hedge fund, Croft Capital, faced a significant stock dip as clients, unnerved by his public display of cowardice and arrogance, began to question his leadership. His firm issued a panicked statement, but the damage was done. Beatrice Croft's annual charity gala, the pinnacle of her social calendar, lost its main sponsor after a soundbite of her calling Ilara trouble went viral. Her socialite friends grew distant, their texts going unanswered. She was no longer an asset, she was a liability. Kyler Thorne's crypto startup, already on shaky ground, had its crucial funding round suspended indefinitely when a prominent tech blogger tweeted, "The crypto bro who called a veteran classless as she saved his life is asking for your investment. Are you cool with this?" Sloane Michelson locked her Instagram after being flooded with comments, her carefully curated online persona shattered. Ilara saw none of it. She was already at her new job. Her office was on the 80th floor of the Hayes Corporation Tower, a minimalist space of glass and steel with a view that stretched to the horizon. The city sprawled below, a complex grid that for the first time didn't feel like a threat. Her desk was bare except for a laptop, a security console, and a single, small, silver frame. Inside it was the creased photo of her in fatigues, a silent reminder of who she was and where she had come from. Her new team, a group of seasoned security professionals, treated her with a mixture of awe and deference. The first boardroom meeting was a trial by fire. The executives, all men in expensive suits, fell silent as she entered. One of them, a vice president with a slick smile, had been at Aurelia that night, seated near Sterling's table. He had laughed at their jokes. Now, he scrambled to his feet to offer her a chair, his hand trembling slightly. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice overly polite, We're incredibly lucky to have you." Ilara simply nodded, taking her seat at the head of the table. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore, it was power. Declan gave her space, allowing her to establish her authority on her own terms. But she felt his presence, a quiet, supportive force. He would sometimes stop by her office late in the day, not to check on her work, but simply to talk. One evening, he found her staring at the photo on her desk. He didn't ask about it directly. He just leaned against the doorframe, his hands in his pockets. "It's a heavy thing to carry, a past like that." Ilara looked up, surprised by his directness. "It's just a part of me. It's the part that saved 30 people in that restaurant," he corrected gently. "Including me. You shouldn't have to hide it to find peace." He paused, his gaze softening. "I hired you for your skills, Ilara, but I respect you for your character, for the person who endured all that judgment without breaking." A warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't realized she was missing. It wasn't just gratitude or respect, it was a deeper connection, a sense of being understood in a way she hadn't been since she'd left the brotherhood of her unit. Their relationship grew in these quiet moments. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a slow, steady construction of trust. He saw past the soldier and the waitress to the woman underneath, and she saw past the billionaire to the man who was lonely in his own gilded hall. One evening, as Alara was leaving the office building, a street vendor selling cheap bracelets called out to her. "For you, lady," he said, his grin wide, holding up a simple string of wooden beads. The moment hit her like a wave. The crowded street, the vendor's call, the simple handcrafted item. It was a direct echo of that dusty market in Kabul, the one where a young boy had grinned at her just before an explosion had changed everything. She froze, her hand halfway to her bag. She took the bracelet, her fingers brushing the worn beads, and handed him a bill far larger than the price. "Keep the change," she said, her voice soft. She slipped the bracelet into her pocket next to her phone and kept walking, her steps steady, her eyes forward. She carried the weight of her past, but it no longer felt like a burden to be hidden. It was a foundation. In the cold, glittering city, she had been a shadow. But in the quiet respect of a good man's eyes and the newfound purpose of her work, she was finally whole, standing tall, not in defiance of the world, but simply as herself. The storm had passed, and in the calm, she had found her way home.